It's such a common thing for people to sit in front of a camera and make a video. Well, it's obvious that when we do something like that, we're doing it so someone's going to look at it. How many videos are out there? It's kind of crazy. But I have a story I want to tell. But before I get into the story, I just wanted to make a comment and share how I'm approaching this thing for whatever it's worth. I don't think it's a small thing to call somebody to sit down in front of you and listen to what you have to say. I think it requires, to be right, to really honor one another and not command someone's attention. But when you do a video, you're not really commanding someone's attention because they can just shut it off and delete it. But nonetheless, this story that I have, it's a life story. And I've kind of wrestled with it a little bit because there's some very unusual details, so many that I wondered about it. And I asked the Lord at one point, I said, why have you done so many strange things and led me in this particular way? And the answer I got back was because it was necessary to create the picture that he desired. So I'm going to tell you about my life. I'm going to share from when I was, let's see, where do we start? We start when I was 16 years old. I come from a Jewish background. All my parents, all two of them, are born in New York, but my four grandparents are all European from Russia, Poland, and Austria. I grew up in the Bronx, a nominal Jewish home. That meant we were very Jewish, but in terms of our going to synagogue, I went to synagogue until my bar mitzvah, and then I didn't go again. It didn't really have meaning to me. But the fact of my being Jewish, there wasn't any question about that. I was Jewish. I grew up in a Jewish Italian neighborhood, and it was a little bit of us and them sort of thing. Not any hostility, but when I thought of the Italians and the Catholic dynamic, which I knew very little about, I thought about these churches with statues, and I thought, oh, I wouldn't set foot on this strange place with idols and statues. When I say nominal Jewish home, I think, yeah, we had a Passover Seder. It was somewhat abbreviated. And fasting on Yom Kippur was so-so. At least if you ate, you wouldn't do it standing in front of the window, or you wouldn't smoke where anybody could see you. But I was very Jewish. When I was 16, I was having a conversation with a Catholic friend and a Jewish friend. These were two buddies that I had known from grade school, and we were talking about God and the Judeo-Christian concept of God. And I got to the point of thinking about the Holocaust and what the world looked like. Now, this is, when I was 16, I was born in 1947, so do the math. I really hadn't thought very much about God. I didn't doubt that God existed. I knew I didn't create myself, and I never imagined that this whole thing just happened all of a sudden, stam, without any cause whatsoever. But it was not a discussion that I'd ever had. But this one time I was standing on the entrance to our building, on the front steps, talking with these two fellows, and I thought, this doesn't make any sense. Our Judeo-Christian concept is of an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving, all-present creator being. And I couldn't, for the life of me, imagine how it could possibly be that such a being, a God that had all this power, could allow the world to go where it had gone, and in particular, to allow the Holocaust to happen. My family didn't lose any members in the Holocaust that I know of. But this is the 60s, and it was not something that was so far in the background of our lives. From that moment on, I became an agnostic. I couldn't say God existed, God didn't exist, I didn't understand it. Beyond my pay grade, leave it alone. Went off to college, went to work afterward in an advertising agency. I was living in Manhattan. I had my own apartment. I was 20 years old, 21 years old. I had a really good address. I was on the east side, the center of New York City. I was walking to work in the morning, and I had friends I hung out with. Everything was going fine. Well, one morning, I can't tell you why it happened. There was nothing going on in my life, nothing going on around me. It was totally normal, like every other day. And I woke up, and it was as though I looked out the window. But this time I wasn't just looking out at the view from my window, which was the 59th Street Bridge, for any of you who know what that is. I was looking at the world and thinking, there's really something wrong with this picture. This is a mess. And here we are. We're at 1968. Vietnam is raging. There's a civil rights struggle going on. Music, the Beatles, all of the bards of the 60s, Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, the whole quadra of people. Government is upside down. The president is impeached. President before him was assassinated. It's a crazy world. But yet, we had all the possibility to provide everything for everybody. We had the technology, we had the means. And there was never, to that time, more death, more destruction, more disaster in a world when we could really take care of everything. There was one thing that had really struck me, that landed really hard. I had read an article about how people had buried nuclear waste in some rural area underneath some city, or a place where there would be a city, knowing that it would eventually leak, but knowing they would be dead before it happened. And they didn't care. And I thought, wow, this is not okay. Well, in looking at the physical world, talk about beauty, perfection, magnificence, wonder, glory. Now, I'm not using those words in any religious context, but I mean, our physical bodies in the universe, it's mind-blowing. Put together with such sensitivity and care. I thought, wow, this is who God is like. This is the nature of God. I thought, how did it get to be such a mess? I said, well, that was our part. If you would just freeze man and stop him, there'd be no more problems. Because everything that was a mess was something that we were doing. I thought about it. I said, we're really sick. Our heart is really sick. I say this was kind of a blessing that in my own mind, I wasn't excluded from the picture, because my story would be very different if I looked at the world and I said, the problem is out there and it's them and I'm really okay. But I didn't see that. It was a real grace in that moment that I could see that I was also part of the problem, and the problem was inside of me as well. I thought about it that morning, and this whole story, I can't tell you how long this was. It could have been a nanosecond. It could have been 2 minutes, but it really wasn't a long time. A whole number of things just downloaded and got processed really quickly. So as I thought, selfishness, self-centeredness, the fact that each one of us, we're thinking first about ourselves, is kind of the core issue here. I thought, well, I mean, what choice is there? Because you look around you and you see the world, and you look, we see what people are and how they function, and the sickness and the greed and whatever it is. How could you stop and not watch out for yourself? You can't. But if we can't, then there's nowhere to go. It's either we had to let go of ourselves and not prefer ourselves over another, where we would put something on another, stepping on someone to get ahead, or we needed somebody. The only way we could let go was if there was someone who would watch out for us. And I thought, well, that would be God. Whatever God is. And that moment ended, but something shifted in that alone moment in my New York apartment at the age of 21 years old, without any real problems, without any real needs. My life completely changed. And the only thing at that point that was important to me was, how can I get rid of this thing inside of me that says me, 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 and lifts me up and prefers me and worries about me over everything else? Because if I couldn't, then there wasn't anything that I could do to add anything to change what I saw in the world that was producing the problem. This kind of just sat there in the background. And it wasn't something like I sat with and thought about. About a year later, with 3 friends that I was hanging around with, I went into a restaurant on a Saturday afternoon. We were on the way to catch an early movie, and I was captivated by the waitress. I walked out of the restaurant on the way to the movie. When we got to the movie theater, I went to a phone booth immediately and called up the restaurant. I'd never done anything like this before. You can imagine what it's like on the other side. And I called up and asked, the manager answered, and I asked to talk to the waitress, and she got on the phone, and I said, listen, I was just in there with 3 other friends, and would you like to go out? So rather than just hang up the phone, which kind of a normal person maybe would have done, or would have been the normal reaction, because I don't mean to say that my wife is not a normal person. She said, listen, I'm only working weekends. Come in next Saturday, I get off at midnight. So the next week I came in, and she got off at midnight. We introduced ourselves, and we walked, lived about 15 minutes away. We walked back to my apartment, and she never left. We still think about this and scratch our heads and say, oh my gosh, we were loonies. I mean, she came to the apartment of someone that she had no idea. And I mean, the whole thing was, so jumping ahead, we're married 50 years. We have 2 children and 4 grandchildren. But we'll unfold some of that as we go along. It's not the center of the story, but it's very close to it. So, we had the normal chemical attraction, but beyond that, both of us were seeing the world in the same way and seeing ourselves in the same way and feeling the need and the longing to understand what is life? What are we doing? What is God? And, at one point, I remember thinking we're like two specks of protoplasm on a ball spinning in space. And we felt like if we just held each other's hands and looked in each other's eyes, we'd have a reference point and be able to have some measure of stability in this world that was going completely crazy. Well, 50 years ago, we thought the world was going crazy, so we don't even have words to describe what's going on right now. We began to delve into searching. I couldn't continue working in advertising anymore. I saw everything differently. I was looking at the greed, the superficiality. I worked in advertising, and I thought advertising was like the armpit of society, because there we were trying to tell people that they needed all these things that they didn't need just so that we could sell things, and that once they bought it, we tell them now it was outdated so they'd have to buy something else. Really didn't care about people. And so this is where I was. This was what I was doing for a living, and I came to the point where I couldn't do it anymore. And we dropped out, basically. We became part of the counterculture movement. And first thing was, we were moved by the struggle of the Black people. And we tried to join the Black Panthers. But that didn't work so well. And just to give you a summary going up front of where we're going with this, things that we did: we got into Eastern religions, we got into the drug culture, we marched in all the peace marches, we went down to Washington with those that were putting flowers in the soldiers' rifles, and we did it all. We lived on a commune out in California. And it was like, as we looked from the distance, we saw things that attracted us. The civil rights struggle was justice for the oppressed. There was the peace movement, love, make love, not war. There was the drug culture in Eastern religions that touched into the fact that there was more to life than what we actually could touch with our hands. Like so many at that time, we really wanted to be part of something. We wanted to be part of a community, to be part of something that was bigger than ourselves. And we went traveling around America in a Volkswagen bus with 3 other people, looking for God, looking for true love, for oneness, for community. And whatever we saw in the distance and we approached, by the time we got up to it and tried it, it was like it was all the same stuff dressed up in different clothes. Self remained. And people's needs individually still remained in the center of everything. Well, that's kind of the overview of it. But fill in a little bit of the details. We left New York and we went to Philadelphia. We had been attracted by what we heard about the spirituality in India. And we wanted to go there and see that and touch that. The renunciation of this world was very attractive to us. I mean, it's a little bit, funny, but we left New York on the way to India. We got as far as Philadelphia. And in Philadelphia, we met someone who had been in India. And he was with some guru. Some of you all know the name Satya Sai Baba, who had some demonic powers. And at that point, we didn't think in terms of demonic and godly, but it was supernatural. And there was only one thing. And if it was supernatural, it was God. Well, we ended up joining together with this fellow and made him our guru. And we're joined by a lady from London and another fellow from the Philadelphia area. And the three guys were Jewish, and the two women were Gentiles, just as a matter along the way. We ended up driving around America 15,000 miles over a course of 5 months, pretty much going from campsite to campsite, looking for this connection with God. Well, at the end of 5 months, it didn't work. And this whole thing was falling apart. We stopped at a commune in California where a cousin of mine he was not at the commune actually, but he was nearby. And he was getting baptized. I hadn't seen him in 10 years. Called him up, said, we're in the neighborhood. And I knew he had been a yoga instructor. So when I called him, I thought this was somebody that was going to be of a similar mind to us. And he said he had come to know Jesus Christ and he was getting baptized the next day. What did I know from baptism? A Jewish boy from the Bronx. So we went to this swimming pool, this California swimming pool. And I don't have a picture to show you right now, but here are these three Jewish fellows, beard to here, hair, long hair, in a top knot, like a sadhu, like a Sikh, wearing an Indian bedspread, a dhoti. And to dress up, we took another bedspread and put it over our shoulders. This is the way we're running around America. By the way we ate during this whole time is we were going into dumpsters. I guess there's a dumpster diving. Driving around America, going into dumpsters and finding food that people are throwing away and trading this and that. It was very catch as catch can sort of existence. But there we stood at this baptism, and afterward they took communion, but they passed us by, and I was pretty offended. I had no idea what they were doing. Well, there we were in the commune. It ended up that Yodin and I stayed at the commune, and the others left. And by that point, this was in 1972, our marriage had come apart. Because in our sort of theology, pair bonding, as we called it, didn't really have a place. It was some human construct that didn't fit into the whole spiritual, atmospheric, vibrational dynamic, that we of the 60s were living in at the time. And actually, after 3 months on the commune, I felt I needed to leave. Some things happened, and I felt I was getting a message from the unseen realm that I needed to get out of there. Yonit had built a little house off under some forest, and I was trying to build a house, but I couldn't quite figure out the design, so it was kind of lumbering along. And I got a hold of my parents, and they sent me a plane ticket. So I went back to New York, thinking I would stay for a little while. This was the beginning of October 1972. I left out a very important part. A couple of months before that, I was asleep in a tent on the commune. Commune was known as the Land. and it was in the Santa Cruz Mountains, right above Los Altos, Palo Alto. My cousin and some other Christian lady came, woke me up one morning and started to tell me about Jesus. What did I know? I was serious about my search. And we had pretty much given up everything that we had, all the thoughts we had, all the possessions we had, knowing that unless we found God, nothing would work. And to even be more specific, all the time driving around in the Volkswagen bus, I was staring at the empty hole inside of my soul. And I could feel I was out of sync with the universe. I didn't know what to do. We just kept waiting and thinking, I don't know, maybe we would renounce enough. No idea. When we were in Philadelphia before we left on this trip, one day we walked out of our apartment, saw some friends in the street, and said, we're leaving. We're going to go find God. We're not coming back. If any of you want anything, there's a whole full apartment. There's a piano, there's dishes, there's tables, chairs. Go take whatever you want. Well, we did pay our rent before we left, but we told everybody, that's it, we're gone. That was our life. And that was the level of the despair and the hunger that we felt and the desperation. So when my cousin and his friend came and said, Jesus is the Messiah, I mean, I had to relate to it honestly. And I couldn't say, no, I don't believe that. I didn't know. I mean, I was not at that point. I say I was, like so many others, they said don't trust anybody over 30. I didn't believe anything anybody told me, unless I experienced it myself. So consequently, when he told me that, I couldn't say yes, but in truth, I couldn't say no. I could speak about all of the things that we had tried, all of the things that we had done. And having given myself to it and coming up empty, I could say no. But this was new territory. So he told me, Jesus is alive. He hears you. And he went on with some other things. I thought, okay. So, okay, let him prove himself to me. Okay, he hears me, and what you're saying is true. He surely knows that I'm surely serious, and that when I find this thing that I'm thinking about as God, that which never changes, the absolute reality, that I'm going to give my life to it completely, whatever it requires to walk in that revelation, to walk in that truth. It was already given. We had already demonstrated that. So I thought, okay, let me pray. I had never prayed in my life. I had never spoken to God. Nor had I ever used the name Jesus with any sense of seriousness or honor. Well, I tried to say his name, and it wouldn't come out of my throat. The name Jesus actually got stuck. And I had to work to say it. So I said, finally, okay, Jesus, my heart is open to you. Come into my life and show me your way. Okay, done. Thanks, fine, bye. So they left. And that was August of 72. Then came October, and I left the commune. But I hadn't thought, since then, since the moment that I prayed, I never thought about praying, that I had done that. And actually forgot it completely. Went back to New York. And boy, it was tough. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't any closer than when I had started years back. And I had run out of things to look into. I had run out of things to try. I ended up renting a storage room on Fifth Avenue that a friend of mine used as a music studio. And thought, all right, I've got to find some life, and how am I going to live? And I had some crafts, working in stained glass lamps. I had music. I never thought of going back to advertising. I don't know. I was pretty lost. But I wasn't searching because I didn't know where to search anymore. And I had resigned myself to just finding some way to put a normal life together. One morning, 3 a.m., I was awakened out of a sound sleep into this presence, into an atmosphere that nearly defies verbal description. And as I woke up, Jesus. It was here in my mind. Jesus. I hadn't thought about him one time since that prayer in the tent in the commune. And I wake up and I'm filled with this awareness of the presence of this being named Jesus that I can't see. And immediately I sensed a power that was unlimited. Can't see him. I don't hear anything. But my consciousness is filled with this presence. And I have this sense, this revelation, this impression that this being, this Jesus, there's nothing that he can't do. Immediately after, it was as though I was naked, like glass, like he knew everything I had ever thought and everything that I had ever done. It's not the kind of thing that you can create, tell yourself, or, I mean, I can hardly explain it. And then in the third thing that happened, the first was all power, all knowledge, and then I felt he accepted me completely, just as I was. And this hole in my soul, this sense of disequilibrium that I had been staring at. I mean, if you asked me what my occupation was for the 4 years prior to that, I would have said staring at the hole in my soul. That was all I did. That's all that mattered. In that moment, it was full. And I experienced absolute peace, total acceptance, and real love. In the face of looking at the mess that I was, that what came back from this being was acceptance and love. It was overwhelming. So I grabbed a guitar, and all I could do was start to sing, Jesus, I love you, Jesus, I love you. And then my Jewishness showed up. And I thought, wait a minute. What's happening to me? I'm Jewish? Am I becoming a Jesus freak? What are my parents going to think? What are my friends going to think? I was still very Jewish. There wasn't any question about that. And then in that moment, in the face of this dramatic experience, I heard words that, they're not words that you tell yourself, and it wasn't a thought. It wasn't the kind of thought that you think. And I heard, "This is the love that I have for you to dwell in forever. But you need to give yourself to me in order to have it." Having been through what I'd been through, in particular, the renunciate yoga chapter and submitting to a guru and having no possessions that you called your own, I understood what that meant. Whatever you say, I do, without question. It was a matter of, I no longer belong to myself. And I couldn't do it. I said, I can't. And he left. Somehow I must have gone back to sleep. This is now, it was like February 1973. I had left the commune in October, and since I left, I hadn't heard from my wife, who's now goes by the name of Yonit. Then she was Joan. So the next morning when I got up, I thought about it, and I had this conversation with myself. Yeah, well, like, what was that? What happened? And what was, okay, it was kind of an obvious situation of, so like, why wouldn't you give yourself to somebody? Well, you'd be afraid that they would take advantage of you. However, what if there was something you couldn't do for yourself that you absolutely needed? You couldn't be without it, you couldn't live without it, and you couldn't do it for yourself. And what if there was someone who somehow you could know that this person could do this thing for you and they'd never take advantage of you? Okay. If you could know that, then it would be a good deal. My conversation ended. And amazingly, see, I didn't know that when I woke up that morning, I didn't have in my mind the fact that I had prayed this prayer months before. I'd forgotten about that. So when this thing happened, I didn't have a frame of reference for it. There was no context. There was no understanding in my mind about why is this happening. And after that incredible moment, it was like the synaptic connection in my nerves, in my brain, was broken, and I forgot that also. Well, the proof of it was, a month or so later, it was March or so, around Passover time, 1973, I got a letter from Joan, my wife. She had accepted Jesus as her Savior. And I read that and thought, oh my, here she is on another trip looking for another guru to follow. And I wrote back and said, listen, when are you going to stand on your own 2 feet and stop going after some spiritual crazy nonsense? I wish I had the letter because it's amazing to think that after what I had gone through, I had no recollection of it. I wrote that back to her, and said, okay, that's it. We need to get a divorce. At that point, it was almost 8 months that we hadn't seen each other, hadn't been in contact. So once more, my mom and dad gave me a plane ticket and said, but don't you bring her home. Because I married the Gentile. She was the cause of all of the problems that took me into all of these strange things. I mean, that's what they thought, of course. So I got on a plane, unannounced, and flew to California. Now, the last time I had been on the commune, I had my hair in a top knot, I had a long beard, and I was running around in a dhoti. Here I was, clean shaven, short hair, with very, very normal clothes. I show up at commune, they didn't recognize me. And I asked for Joan, and they said, oh, she's off at some Jesus festival up in the hills. Now, on this particular commune, there had been a number of the hippies that came to faith, but most of them still remained in their, spacey place of everything is everything and all of where we were back then. So they told me, yeah, she's been hanging out in this house up there on the hill, this geodesic dome that a friend of ours had built. So I went up there to wait for her. This was Thursday, May 10th, 1973. Sunday, she came back from the Jesus Festival. Now, I found out afterward that while she was at the festival, the Spirit of the Lord was dealing with her, battling, telling her she needed to go to New York to see me. And she had no interest whatsoever. But finally she surrendered and said, okay. If I have to hitchhike back to New York, I'll go. She gets to the commune and there I am. First time we've seen each other in 8 months. We sit down, and immediately she said, how are you doing? Are you telling people about Jesus? And I thought, what? Why would I do a thing like that? Now, she had heard the story of what had happened in the tent months before, 8 months before. And I had prayed this prayer saying, Jesus, my heart is open to you, meaning to the truth, whatever. You come into my life and show me your way. Prove it, and then we can talk. But the way she heard it, it sounded like I had made a profession of faith and had given myself to Jesus, the Gentile God. And when she asked me the question, coming from that point of understanding, something happened. Literally, a light went on. And there we were in this geodesic dome with candles flickering, and the entire place was brilliant, glowing light. And I knew. I remembered. It came back to me in that moment. The prayer in the tent, the revelation in the basement was the exact answer to the prayer in the tent. And I knew it was true. He was the Messiah. And the Bible was true from cover to cover. I never read it, I knew it. From Genesis to Revelation, this was the Word of God. And I start to weep. The last thing that happened in the outer realm was, so you're telling people about Jesus? And I said, why should I do that? And then it dropped, I'm starting to weep, and she says, "What did I say?" And I said, "I know it's true." You know, I'm so thankful for the way the Lord brought me along, because it's beyond any influence of people. It's beyond the thinking, the machinations of my own mind, putting things together. It was really a supernatural experience that left no question as to the veracity of what I had come to think. So interesting, the next day, woke up. First thing I thought was, what was that? Oh my. And I went back into my, oh, really? And when I would end up in such a moment, I reached for a cigarette. So Joni says, you know, Jesus lives in you now. And whatever you do, you cause him to experience. Okay, I believe that. So I thought, I don't want to do anything he wouldn't do. So I closed my eyes and I tried to imagine, I tried to picture Jesus smoking a cigarette. I couldn't get it. And I thought, okay, I don't believe he would do it. If he wouldn't do it, I'm not going to do it. Now, I'd smoked for about 10 years, from the time I was 15. And I had tried to quit, and I had, these up and down sort of battles, and I hadn't been able to. From that moment on, it was like I had never smoked in my life. It was gone. Over the next couple days, one of the fiery local believers got assigned to my case. And he was with me like glue, quoting scripture. Morning till night, scripture, telling me stories. A couple days later, I got a notice. My younger brother, 5 years younger, was getting married on the weekend. I had to go. Got on a plane, flew back to New York, got into a taxi cab, and I was pretty excited. And I'm starting to share with the taxi cab driver, I've been saved like 4 days, and he said, "So are you a preacher? Are you a minister?" Oh. When I got back to my basement, I walked in, and I felt my wife's absence. No, she'd never been there. But it was like she was there and had gone out, and I was waiting for her to come back. I went and talked to some folks. Being Jewish and coming to faith at that time was, you were sort of almost like a rock star. Jewish believer. I went to this bookstore in the middle of Manhattan to buy a Bible. And I'll say something about this somewhere along the way. I bought a New Testament because it was what fit in my pocket. And I told the person that worked there that I was Jewish. And they said, "Oh, I know somebody else." And they connected me with someone that was part of a little fellowship that was meeting on the Upper West Side. And they took me to this meeting. Oh, I have to also say, it's kind of funny. When I left California, it was a Pentecostal church, and they said, look for a Pentecostal church. So I was looking for something that had to do with 5 something. Penta, that's 5. I had no idea what this meant. The Jewish head growing up back there, I didn't know Catholic and Protestant. I just knew Catholic, statues, idols, didn't know anything about denominations. So I ended up in this little fellowship. I was just 26 years old. I was one of the older guys there. Probably the mean age was 21, and about 20 or so, 25 people sitting around in a circle on the floor in the fellowship room of a Presbyterian church right across the street from Columbia University in Manhattan. And they had a message, they sang some songs, and someone said, "So does anybody have any prayer requests?" And I said, "I have this wife." And I told the story. Now, obviously, you'll notice this is not scripted because I keep going back to tell you things I forgot to tell you. One day in the basement, I heard these words: "Call your father-in-law, and he will provide a plane ticket for Joan to come back." And I thought, oh my. Not a rich man. And the last thing they knew was we were loony hippie freaks out on drugs. And how am I going to ask him? I didn't know what to say. So the first thing I did is I called my brother, I called Yonit's sister, Joan's sister, to try to get money for the ticket. And nobody had any money. Well, my first act of faith, I made the plane reservation, then I called up my father-in-law, having no idea how this was gonna work out. And I said, she's different, she's changed. And if I could, I would send her a ticket. And he said, "Do you think she'll use it?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Okay, I'll do it." But I couldn't bring myself to tell him I had already made the reservation, knowing that he was going to do it. So I said, "I'll call you back." So I called him back, made the reservation, and then I called my cousin in California and I said, "Would you get her a message that there's a ticket waiting for her?" She's not here to tell the story, but so the message comes to her that there's a plane ticket for you to go back to New York to see Arnie. And she's weeping and weeping and weeping and struggling. And all of her hippie friends in the commune ask her, "What's the matter?" And she tells them. And they said, "So don't go if you don't want to." She goes, "You don't understand. I have to go. I don't have any choice." So she came. I picked her up. We were like sort of spiritual brother and sister. We didn't really have a relationship at that point. I mean, we were different people than we were when we met. And the whole foundation upon which we connected was gone. So we spent a couple days together, and then she went off to Philadelphia to see her parents. And I called her up one day. Having already a conviction that we needed to be together. In my speaking with folks that had been walking with the Lord for a while, I came to understand, reading in the scripture, God hated divorce. And I'd heard in my spirit him saying, "If you're going to walk with me, you're married." And when you said, "I do," I said, "Amen." And that was the end of it. So I called her up and was trying to convince her of God's perspective and will. And she wouldn't hear of it. And her thought was, look, I was an unbeliever when we got married. So I'm kind of not responsible for what I said. She said that, and I started speaking to Satan. I'd not done this before. I think I heard it somewhere along the way. I saw somebody do it. So I began to rebuke the lying spirit, speaking to her on the phone. And she said, I got to get off the phone. I'll call you back. What she told me later was she felt like she was going to throw up. And all these voices, when I started to speak to the demonic, into the demonic realm, something started swirling in her and she threw herself across her bed thinking, I'm going to have a tantrum. I'm going to cry really hard and God's going to really feel bad and tell me I don't have to go back. Well, she said that didn't happen. She got 2 squeaks of something that sounded like a cry out, and then that was it. Hour later, she called me up and said, when do you want me to come? Now, just prior to that, I had gone to a little house fellowship that was connected to that church of people sitting around on the floor in a circle. And they all prayed when I told them the story. The next meeting, which was on Friday, a couple days later, we walked in together. Quite a moment. We didn't have a relationship. We didn't really know each other. But we knew we were married. And thought, if God could save our souls from hell, he can surely make a marriage out of whatever it was that we had at that point. Well, first night, we spent sleeping side by side. Woke up in the morning. And again, this is something, be better to hear her say it, but she said, I knew I had to say something, but I didn't know what it was. She opened her mouth and said, I believe God wants us to have a child. Totally blew her own mind with what came out of her own mouth. But what's even more was the Lord had spoken to me in the night. And I just said, yeah, he told me to. It's quite a lot to tell. Our son was born a year later. Actually, I think this is relevant enough to pass this along. Shortly after I came to faith, I started getting words. Tomorrow you're going to get a job. You're going to have an accident, and that'll be your cue to stop driving a taxi cab. And here's the amount of money that it's going to be for the apartment that you're going to pay, and your son will be born a year from the day you move into your new apartment. And I thought, God, why are you telling me these things? They didn't seem like really important. And what came back was, I'm teaching you to hear my voice, because the day will come that it will be a matter of life and death. The due date of our son was October 1st. So I declared what I had heard. October 1st comes. October 2nd. October 3rd. October 4th. And I said, but you said, and he said, October 4th is the day you moved in. A year from the day we moved in, our son came. So that was 1974, 45 years ago. That was a pretty strong experience, those different things that happened. But what's happened since then has even been stronger. The manifestation of God's presence, the clarity, the revelation has continued to increase. I'd like to just clear up perhaps one little point and close a circle where I made a comment about Jesus being the Gentile God. Well, when I had my moment of revelation sitting there in the commune in the tent with the wife I hadn't seen for 8 months, I knew he was the Messiah of Israel. And subsequently, that has become just normal and real, that, as most Jewish people have thought, you don't continue to be Jewish when you come to Jesus. Well, his name is actually Yeshua. And there's never been a question about my Jewishness. I gave you a short version of the 4-year journey that we went on. But I've written a book. It's actually published in Hebrew and in German, and it exists on a website in English. The name of it is Nothing to Lose. And I wanted to say something about the title, which came from a Bob Dylan song: when you have nothing, you have nothing to lose. When you ain't got nothing, you got nothing to lose. And somehow in the midst of all of this, what's really clear, and it continues on and has continued on through all of the subsequent years, when we come to the end of ourselves, and only then can we be sure that God's going to show up. The birthing of the very nation of Israel, it came forth as our father Jacob was confronting a situation. His brother Esau was coming to kill him because he had defrauded Esau, taken his birthright. And in this moment, Esau's got 400 men, and Jacob knows what's in store for him. And it forced him to take a look at himself. And he looked inside, and he saw what was there. And I get this from reading between the lines of the biblical account, because it says that he sent all of his possessions and his family off, and then he went back over a river. In Hebrew, the name means empty, the river Yavuk, and there he wrestled with a man. Well, needless to say, he didn't know there was anybody waiting there for him. So what happened? He went and emptied himself. What does that mean? He looked at himself, and he saw, knowing that if this is the person that Esau meets, he's going to kill him. And he ends up wrestling with this angel, which from the context, we understand it's actually Yeshua himself. And Yeshua says, the day is breaking, let me go. I mean, he's kind of playing with him, obviously. And Jacob says, I will not let you go until you bless me. Now, in Hebrew, the word for bless, the root of the word means, it's the word for knee. So you think about blessing and knee, and what's the connection? It's that the blessing comes when you're humbled and when you're on your knees. Jacob needs to be changed, and he says to the Lord, I will not let you go until you change me. And at that point, it was done. And his opponent says to him, you've wrestled with God and man, and then declares over him a new name and a new life. But what I want to say in the context coming out of that framework is that what I found in those early years of searching, and what I have continued to experience for now the 46 years that I have walked with the Lord is it's always been the same story. When you search for me with your whole heart, when you come to the place that you need me, that you can't do it, that you don't have the answer, that's where God shows up. You know, to try to tell somebody they need this or they need that, if they haven't figured it out themselves, it doesn't happen. But all those, I believe, who truly love the truth and have truly hunger for the truth will ultimately come to the end of themselves. And then you'll find the Lord waiting. The title of the story, and it's about a 2-hour read, and it's a journey through the 60s. Anybody that's interested in that period of time will appreciate many of the things that are in there. But the essence of the story was, in the title, the essence of our life is coming to realize that here on earth, we have nothing. We can't work this out. We can't fix it. We can't fill the hole. So here comes God. Here comes Yeshua and says, give me your life. Nobody does that unless they have no hope. Nobody gives their life away unless they have no other choice. In that day, the Lord will come.